incense
Incense,
because
the
I
incense.
talk
I'm
about
sorry.
the incense, but they don't expand on it.
We're
So,
going to. We're going to get there.
okay. And
Yeah,
also,
that's it's a very it was a very if you look at how the service played out and when things were done and where they were done and who did them, you'll see that the incense was actually considered a very, very lofty service, and we're going to get into that.
yes.
Not today, but we'll get into it. It's coming
Okay.
up. Yeah.
And also, I wanted to know, how does a priest become defiled?
How does it what
A,
become defiled? A priest become defiled? Well, the a priest here, when it's talking about a priest becoming defiled, it's saying, let's say a priest touched a dead he's walking through the park on the way to the temple, and he touches a carcass of an animal. He has to go through a process of ritual purity. Any contact with death, even though there's nothing wrong with death in the sense that it's part of life, it's part of reality, but in from a Torah perspective, the whole idea of death is a distortion of a divine reality. Because if God is life and we're connected to God, why would there should be death? And in the narrative of the Torah, at the very beginning of the Torah, God tells Adam and Eve not to, that they have life before them, but it gives them really just one thing to make sure they do is that, and not eat from a specific tree. What God says, if you will do that, in other words, if you're going to disobey me, if you're going to unplug from me, you will die. That's the language of the Torah. Now they did, and they lived another 900 years. They didn't die right away. What the Torah is, what God was telling them is that if you do that, if you unplug from me, there will be death. Yeah, you can live, another couple centuries, or another few centuries, but it's not. There's going to be the concept of death, and there, from a Torah idea, death, which is, as I say, it's part of life. Death itself is an indicator of the fact that we're not so plugged into God, because God is all life. So, and we have godliness within us, and the soul doesn't die. But if the body was truly connected to the soul, we would be immortal. And therefore, what the Torah is saying is that if when there is whenever someone who's representing God, a Kohen, they should be more sensitive to their connection with death, because they want the idea of being retaining more of the divine connection, and even the symbolism of it. So even though a Kohen had a mitzvah to be partake in the funerals of immediate relatives, and that wasn't considered a bad thing, I had to do it. But even a rabbi Kohen today, we have one of our rabbis in Chabad in the Scotch Plains, Fanwood. He's a Kohen. He can only perform funerals in a very limited way, because by Torah law, he's not supposed to be engaging with that closely. I'm not a Kohen. And I do funerals all the time, and I think it's a good thing. Torah thinks it's a good thing, but death is not a good thing, and therefore the Kohen had to stay away. So we say an example of a Kohen getting defiled. For me, back in the times when there was a temple, so I went to a funeral, or I touched a dead animal in the forest. Not a big deal, because my day is not about being in the temple and working with holy articles. So it will come closer to Passover or whatever, so I'll make sure to go to the mikveh to purify myself, because I'm going to the temple. But for a Kohen who had to deal with this all the time, and their food very often was from tithes, which had a ritual sanctity to them, they had to be very careful. And they were very careful. People were in days of old, people were very, very careful about these things because it mattered about going to the temple. Today, we're all not ritually pure. Okay. Oh, actually, I muted everyone, so I assume that. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to go further with page 38, all the way on the right, and we had already read the scriptural parts of this on the top of 38, on top of the line. And as we know, this whole book has as a large focus the different offerings and the ritual exercises that were undertaken in the temple and in the tabernacle. And this specific little section we've been going through mentions something a little interesting, a little off direct topic of offerings. It's about the ashes, because if they're taking a substance and they're burning it on the altar, there's going to be ashes. Now, the way the Torah talks about two ways of dealing with the ashes, because the ashes is obviously it's the leftovers, it's not the offering itself, and you just can't have ashes piling up. It has to be taken out somewhere to leave room on the altar. So there are two things. One is a service, which was called the lifting of the ashes. There was in the morning, they'd come, scrape to the side, and they would take from the center in a like a pan, silver pan. They would lift some up and take it to the side. So there was it was a ritual. It wasn't sanitation. It wasn't house cleaning. It was a ritual, the elevation of the ashes. But then there's just what do we do with the rest of the ashes? And they would put it to the side, and that would accumulate, and eventually they would take it outside the temple precincts. So there's one is what we call in Hebrew, it's haramas hadeshin, the lifting of the ashes, which just seems more of a ritual. And then there's the taking the ashes outside, which is it's all holy stuff, but it's more housekeeping. So even one of the, as we've read, the Torah is indicating that for the lifting of the ashes, the Kohen would be dressed in Kohen regalia, like the Kohen would be dressed during a service, because there was a service element to the lifting of the ashes. When taking the accumulation of ashes outside the temple precincts, the Kohen would change clothing and get into more civilian clothes, and that partially because it was seen as more of a housekeeping exercise. But for the first one, even though there was it's just lifting the ashes and putting it to the side, there is the idea that it is a relatively speaking, it's a mundane exercise. But if it's a mundane exercise, sometimes a mundane exercise, it needs to be approached. What seems like a mundane exercise is not such a mundane exercise, and because there's a holy quality to it, we need to be dressed correctly. And part of the language that's found in commentaries talking about this, even in the Middle Ages, is how the Torah is telling us to that if we're going through a meaningful exercise, a spiritual exercise, a religious exercise, we should dress the part. Now around here, I'm just happy people come, and I don't really care how they dress. And if someone asks how they should dress, I say just be comfortable, be respectful, be comfortable. But in truth, there is something to be said for dressing up a bit for something special. And we know what we do. usually, right? You dress differently for a wedding than for a 4th of July barbecue, probably. And since we, if we value the ritual exercise, we want to be able to dress up for it a bit. I won't talk too much about it because I'm not advocating it for you, but there is a value to it. Now, since we've spoken about ashes, there's a lot about ashes, and we mentioned it before. I want to really touch base a little bit with what we've spoke about, I guess, last week. Ashes are physicality, and it's leftover physicality, where the form and the function and the majesty of a specific object has been burned, and this is what's left over. In the case of the offerings, some of the imagery is whatever we were giving to God, so to speak, has been consumed by flames and ascended to God and divinity, both in the spiritual sense and even in the physical sense, that is dissipated. And what's left is the more the physicality, its material existence. So we had spoken about that there are, roughly speaking, two ways in dealing. We all have to deal with the physical world. Spiritual as you are, we have to deal with the physical world. So let's say that there are three ways of engaging the physical world. One is seeing the world as my playground, or it's a place for me to see where I can have, how much pleasure I can have, and how much I can get, how much I can accumulate. It's what I want out of the world. It's the world there as at my service, which is a self-oriented way of looking at the world. Another way of looking at the world is just I need to have a house and a car, and I need, for myself, for my family, I need to eat, I need to take care of my body, and I'm going to do that. But I want to have all of these things. I have a higher purpose in mind. So while I got up today and in my house and taking care of my fiscal needs and physical needs and nutritional needs and exercise, I want to be in a position. What do I want? All that, because I try to focus. I want to lead a meaningful life, and hopefully today, when I go to bed, the world will be a bit brighter because I live today. I'm gonna try and make myself a bit of a candle in bringing light to the world, and I'll figure it out during the day. But in order for me to do that, I've got to be in good shape, and I've got to be have strength from eating, and I got to have a house and a car and some sense of psychological security and balance. So that's a much more, it's a more other-centered, a higher focused life. It's not just about me taking out, benefiting from the world, and that is what we would call the idea of living for the sake of heaven, which would be the translation of a phrase that we think of something higher. We look at our lives, take care of ourselves, but we want to have a higher purpose. Then there's another possibility, that a person is so spiritually attuned and so spiritually connected, that's not only that I am taking my normal physical life and physical care for that life and giving it meaning by devoting myself to a life of a day of purpose, but that's even as I'm engaging the physical world, I recognize that it's God's world, that there's godliness in what I'm imbibing, what I'm eating, that I'm trying to experience my relationship with God, even sitting at the table, eating the food, and part of that is maybe in how I'm connecting with the people, other people sitting there at the table, if there are other people, are just in my focus. So one is and it's a little subtle difference perhaps, but it's a very real difference, that one is me partaking of the world in a very human way, but for higher purpose. The other one is, in the language of the scriptures, knowing God in all your ways. That even as I'm doing something which is seemingly for my own upkeep, it's not only that and my own sustenance. Not only that I'm doing that because I'm for the sake of heaven. I'm knowing God in the ways. As I'm doing it, I'm also God conscious. So if we speak about ashes as representing the physicality, there's two types of ashes. There's the ashes that are more inherently connected to God. And then there's the ashes which are for the sake of God, or that there's higher purpose, but ultimately they're innately more ashes. There isn't the God element within the ashes, it's that the ashes have a godly divine purpose. So having said that, we'll turn to page 38 all the way on the right. And here we said that the Kohen takes the ashes outside the camp. So the thought here is, any involvement with the ashes that must be taken outside the camp, and the ashes outside the camp means with those mundane activities that we pursue for the maintenance and enhancement of our personal lives, is an unnatural task for a Jew. Okay. So what they're saying, first of all, what they're insinuating is that the ritual of lifting the ashes with that silver shovel, that symbolizes physicality, which is it itself is a service. It's part of a service. That yes, it may look to you like I'm eating a tuna sandwich, but this is part of my expression of connection to God. And then the ashes that we put on the side and that we take out as housekeeping, it's ashes. But it's within a temple precinct. We make sure not to put it in a place that where there will be spiritual contamination. So that element, the idea of the ashes that we take outside, that is something that presents a challenge to our spiritual lives. So I want to just give a little bit of context before going further here. In principle, we would hope to be able to lead totally purposeful lives. That can mean a day of helping in a soup kitchen. It could be a day of study. I mean, there are ways to lead, off on the face of it and thoroughly meaningful lives. I'm sorry. There are meaningful lives we could have, but lives that are engaging purposeful ends. Now, most of us don't have the luxury to spend all our day that way. Now, and frankly, even if someone told me that they have a trust fund and they're 30, 40 years old, but they don't need to work, and they're going to devote themselves to a life of just doing good things, I would actually be a little bit circumspect about that. Having seen what and worked with people for so many years, I'd say, it's good to be productive somewhere. Work a little bit. It's good. And you need to be a certain place, certain time. Those are good things. Do good stuff, but I don't know how many people can actually have the engine to really create a day full of all purposeful things. It's not easy. It's not even if you want to. It's not easy to find all those things. So, to our minds, this is not exactly what is the prescription. For us, I would say, if any of us say, listen, I have a trust fund, or I'm going to retirement, whatever it is, say, make sure to do good, constructive things and useful things. But obviously, there's going to be other stuff also. You're not going to fill your day. In the principle of it, though, since we are God's employees, so to speak. We're always on we're on a mission. What we should be doing is looking for purposeful things to do, and even so, we have to support ourselves. Okay, so we'll take some time to support ourselves, get enough, and then go back into purposeful things. Again, I'm not saying they should try this at home, but in the idea of it, if I'm a soul created by God, and I want to be able to be connected to God, then I should spend time with things that connect me to God, and not with things that take away my focus, which I do, and I have to. So how I deal with those things and how I see those things is something else that's work inside me. But the fact is that, running to the bank or doing those things, they're not divine endeavors. So in the principle, say, since we are all, in a sense, priests, we're not Cohens, but we're not, the idea is where God does call us a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And as such, we really should be more tabernacle focused. In other words, the tabernacle, not the tabernacle, but living lives of more straight up holiness. Wholly absorbed in holy pursuits. Praying to God, studying His Torah, performing His commandments, revealing and experiencing His presence in creation. So the idea is that the ashes is something we say, it's not the center focus of my life. The center focus of my life is offering myself to God. It's the offering, not the ashes. The ashes is the physicality. So then, true, we deposit these ashes in an undefiled place. We engage in all these mundane activities for the sake of heaven. But even so, they force us to leave the heightened divine consciousness of expressly holy pursuits. There's something that's a more directly holy pursuit, and there's something else which it can be. It's a means to something higher. So if I, sitting yesterday with my kids and had a 4th of July barbecue and we went swimming, all that was great. It was great for us to get together, and there's higher purpose, and I don't regret it at all. But it's hard to say that was a straight holy pursuit. We were having fun. We're doing, we're something together. It's a good thing. But straight holy pursuits is maybe if I would have spent a day at a food bank or studying, was a little different. So the Torah therefore tells us that we must tend to these ashes only when they accumulate to the point that they impede the fire's ability to consume the offerings. So the imagery that they're bringing here is that the ashes sit on the side. We are spending our time with offerings, but at a certain point, ashes get in the way. So you have no choice but to deal with the ashes. As long as we can continue our divine pursuits unhindered, there's no reason to be distracted by material concerns. So this is a way of thinking, and people very often used to do this in the times of the shtetl. They devoted themselves to a life of just straight up pursuit of Torah mitzvahs. Then they had to put some food on the table. They went and they worked and they put on enough, and then they went back. It's not in our way of thinking, but the idea is, in the principle, say, to feed my soul, I need some straight up holiness, and I want to feed my soul. I have to deal with other things. I have to deal with other things. But in a way, it's not. It's as far as our priorities and our focus. Our focus should be on things that feed the soul. We need the other things for what we need. There's a story that the Rabbi mentioned a few times about a predecessor of his, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, who had a disciple who needed to make a living, and everybody has to work, and he went into the footwear business. And it did very well, and he got very engaged in it. And he showed up a little less to the synagogue, a little less to classes. The success consumes. So when he came to the Rebbe he asked for a blessing. So the Rebbe said to him, I said that I give you a blessing for your business. I want to comment that feet in shoes I see all the time, but a head in shoes I've never seen. You devote everything. You're so consumed. But the business is that you should have success, but don't forget, it's not either or. And don't forget your spiritual pursuits, because the material pursuits are going so well, which is very, it's a very common struggle people have. It is therefore imperative that we remain mentally inside the tabernacle whenever we venture outside the camp. And this is a very important and a very important challenge, and it is a challenge for everyone. When you engage the world, inner focus is critical to a meaningful life. And inner focus tends to be there when we're in special moments. Like if I'm standing with a couple under a chuppah, I'll often tell them that I hope that mentally they never leave the chuppah, that they take whatever they're feeling, the connectedness they're feeling, and they inject it, infuse it into the life ahead. Because under the chuppah, it's the surroundings and what's going on lends to the sense of commitment to each other. Then we go about our jobs and life kicks in, and this happens. Then the chuppah is a memory. We want to try and bring that in. So holy moments in prayer or at Rosh Hashanah or wherever it is, that's called being inside the sanctuary. When there's a focus, focus is not a problem. I've got my priorities straight. Then I'm going to hit the real world. It's harder to keep the priorities straight because there's things pulling at you, and the news puts us in one place, and all of those things that really pull and derail often focused, prioritized thinking. And the idea is we want to keep our minds, our priorities, and our focus that as much as we can, that part of us is sacred, even though we have to go and deal with things. I want to be able to refer back. So even when we venture outside the camp, mentally to stay inside the tabernacle. As we have noted, we draw the inspiration required for this feat from the Torah's account of the binding of our forefather Isaac. Okay, so as we've noted, it's something we studied a few years ago. I don't remember it, and you're not going to remember it probably. There is the Torah tells us. We read this on Rosh Hashanah, the binding of Isaac. So Abraham had one child with his wife Sarah, and he's very, they waited a very long time, and this was obviously his most prized possession, not possession, the most precious thing to him in the world. And God has told Abraham that he's going to see grandchildren from him, and then God tells him to bring him up as an offering on an altar. So, which for Abraham, we can only imagine what kind of struggle that would be just on a basic human level. And yet Abraham immediately obeys, sets out with Isaac and two helpers, and they set out to Mount Moriah, which is what we call today the Temple Mount, and they're going to there's going to be an offering. Now Isaac at that stage is 37 years old. Abraham's a very old man. So when Abraham tells him, "You're the offering," this is Isaac certainly could have just said, "Go away, I'm telling Ma," or whatever, and not gone through with it. And yet he allowed himself to be bound and in as far as he's concerned, to be able to give himself up for this offering. Why? He trusted his father 1,000% as a prophet of God. If his father Abraham told it to him, he knew this came from God. Now, he also knows that God said he's going to have kids. So he's entitled to a question, you think. But as he's laying there, and we can only imagine, but how the Talmud will see it, if he has a question, the question is, do I live what I've been promoting for decades? Monotheism and commitment to God and setting aside personal needs to do God's wish? Or is this the event which shows me that, up to a point, I'm not ready to actually give up my life for God? And he chose to lay there and stretch out his neck to make it accessible for Abraham's knife. And I think we all know that God reached out to him and don't do that. It was just a test, and so on. It was a test of Abraham. It was a test of Isaac. So one of the things that the Talmud tells us is that Isaac's soul left him at that time, and then it came back in. What does that mean? And what was the purpose? His soul left him, and then so in a way he did die, and was immediately resurrected. One of the points of that is that the Isaac who got up on the altar and the Isaac off the altar were two different Isaacs. One was an Isaac who had a theoretical commitment to God, genuine as it could be. And he's part of the family business, the spreading monotheism. He believes in it. He's willing to put aside creature comforts for the sake of God. He believes it. He means it. He promotes it. But he's never been tested in this way, the ultimate test. So the Isaac who gets off the altar sees the world in a very different way. And he sees his life in a different way. His life now is purely a gift of God because he could have lost it. And he recognizes that the most important thing is not what he has and not even the physical life. It's the connection with godliness. And I guess to some extent, if you speak to someone who has survived a terrible ordeal, which likely could have been fatal, someone who came out of the camps or someone who emerged, thank God, from a terrible illness or terrible situation. On the other side, in my experience in dealing with people of that type of have gone through such an experience, they look at life differently because they almost lost it. And maybe we could say it's more maturely, and a recognition that this isn't just about me having fun. It's about me making my days count. So Isaac, when he comes off the altar, as great as he was before, he has changed. And one of the things that the Talmud mentions several times is that if one would approach the Temple Mount, you could see the altar there, and you could see the ashes of Isaac gathered on the altar. So it's a Talmudic expression. It's a Talmudic blurb that happens a few times in Talmud. It makes no sense in the physical world because They didn't burn Isaac. There are no ashes of Isaac. Isaac was totally alive with all his limbs when he got up on the altar and when he came off the altar. They didn't burn anything. But later on, they brought an offering, but it's not Isaac's ashes. There are no ashes of Isaac. What do we speak about the ashes of Isaac? The ashes of Isaac are the sense of self, the smatterings of ego or whatever it was that he went up there with as a normal human being. He left something behind when he came off the altar. So looking at it that way, so as we've noted, we draw the inspiration required for this feat from the Torah's account of the binding of our forefather Isaac. As I said, Isaac, when he came off, he looked at the physical world differently. He looked at the idea of the physical urges differently, and material self-orientation differently. And therefore, what's left behind was the ashes, the physicality. Recalling how his self-sacrifice transformed his very body into an offering, rendering even his ashes fit to remain on the altar for all time, inspires us to transform our ashes as well into material fit to remain on the altar. So they take this imagery and this metaphor perhaps one step further. That's not only that Isaac left behind part of himself, and to the extent there was a self-orientation in him. But what it did is it said, Isaac showed us going forward a life where even his ashes are fit for the altar. Even his physical life was now consumed with his desire for meaning. His physical life is now totally framed by his desire to connect with God and to lead a meaningful life. His life was a gift. He saw his life as a gift, and every day needed to be something where he was experiencing the beauty that can be in human life. And the beauty he was looking for was the meaning and the purpose and the sense of service that he could have. That idea, we call it ashes. His ashes were fit to remain on the altar. We can thus remain focused on the true purpose of life, even while engaged in secondary pursuits. It is for this reason that we read the account of his binding as a sacrifice daily before our morning prayer. Before we pray, we go through actually, I think in most prayer rites, we read through that section of Torah that has the binding of Isaac. Why? There are a lot of things to remember in Torah. Why is that relevant every day? Because that helps give us a framework for how to go through our day. Because most of our days are not going to be spent in the synagogue and meditation. We're going to be engaging in the world. To remind ourselves of how connected God was and Isaac was, and how he engaged the physical world was it is for us every day a critical shot in the arm for how the possibilities of how we can engage our physical world. Now I'll turn to page 39. And the Torah continues. The fire burning on the altar must not be allowed to go out. There has to be a flame on the altar all the time. And there were several different fires, but one fire had to always be on. For although divine fire will consume the sacrifices, you must start burning them up with fire produced by human agency. This is something that I think we've discussed, but there is this idea. Torah tells us that there was a flame from heaven that came down to the altar to consume offerings, but what we needed to do was first put a match. And that's one of it's a basic Torah idea that while we're looking for God's blessings, we've got to start finding our own blessings and put the match to the fire. Even if we're looking for the divine fire, God wants us to create our own blessings. And he's going to help. The priest chosen each day for the task, because there was a rotation, must kindle fresh wood upon it every morning. So there was wood. There was a service of bringing wood. There was wood that was brought to use for all the offerings, and there was wood that you burn the wood itself. The wood itself would be an offering, and we'll get into it a little bit. You must arrange the cut up pieces of the morning daily ascent offering directly upon it, meaning this should be the first sacrifice offered up each morning. As I said in past weeks, that there's an offering in the morning, offering in the afternoon, and those were the bookends. Everything happened in between. But those were perpetual. Those were always, every day there were those two beginning, one beginning, one end, the same one. Such that no parts of any other sacrifice intervene between it and the fresh logs placed on the fire each morning. The priest must burn up the fats of the peace offerings as well as any other sacrifices that may be offered up that day upon the remains of the morning daily offering, meaning only after the morning daily offering has been offered up. Similarly, the last sacrifice offered up each day must be the afternoon daily offering, which is what I mentioned. That's what it's called a mincha, which today we have as our prayer mincha. So one is the morning, the offering of the shachar, like shacharit, which is the Hebrew word that we use to describe our morning prayers, and mincha, which was the offering of the mincha, which is the name we use for our afternoon prayer. That's a correlation. Okay, so now number 5 at the bottom, Chassidic insights. The priest must kindle fresh wood upon it every morning. As mentioned previously, anyone offering up a sacrifice must intend to thereby offer up himself and draw closer to God. Which this is one of the reasons I prefer the term offering. We're offering ourselves to God. We're turning to God and saying, God, I love you and I'm yours, and I want to lead a life the way you asked me to. That's the general approach of any offering. The different types of offerings reflect the specific aspects of the stuff that must be refined, elevated, and brought close to God. But the common denominator of all types of offerings is the general, all-embracing submission to God that must precede the refinement of the particulars. So, in our approach to God, or approach in a special relationship, you say, "I love you, and I want to be who you need me to be." That's a general sense. To say, now, and particularly, I'm going to stop leaving my socks on the floor, or whatever, because there are generalities are not going to get us that far, but there is a general approach that drives it, that I'm committed. And so that's the general approach to the offerings. Then the offerings, each offering had its own more particular message of coming close. Debbie.
I have a question. Okay, first, I really wish Donna Butler were listening. Maybe I will send her the link after I upload it. But
yeah, that's one of our favorite stories. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two, I was just, to a point and then 2 questions. I like the emphasis you made on how he really needed to be tested to kind of really show his true colors in a positive sense, right, and to confirm the commitment. And I think that's true with even humans. We run drills for emergencies, but you never really know how you're going to react until you're in an emergency. And it's, I guess, can help me try to appreciate having some of those challenges and when I'm successful in responding, or fixing when I respond less than ideally. But so my 2 questions are, one, there's a lot of focus on Isaac, who, yes, had to, they say child, but he was really an adult, had to submit to this whole process. And yes, it was impressive, and better words, great that he did that. But like Donna, I always also think Abraham was actually tested more in this process as the parent, having to do this, thinking that it's going to be a successful sacrifice. And I'm always wondering why there isn't more concern about the parallel to the child sacrifices that the pagan world was doing at this time. And would we really have used Isaac's ashes for anything? But secondly, in this last sentence you just were reading about, that the sacrifice we must intend to therefore offer up ourselves, have that intention. Like we are supposed to be thinking that we would be willing to literally sacrifice ourselves instead of these animals.
Well, okay, that's a great question. Two things. First of all, when it comes to Abraham, if I understood what you asked, what you commented before this last thing, there is the way that Torah frames it, and the way it's conventionally seen is that this was a test of Abraham. The idea that I'm offering, and I've offered before, that this was also a test of Isaac, is actually not so conventional. But we say that there was something special there. But it's even the way the Torah talks about it, God doesn't talk to Isaac at all saying, wow, you did this. He talks to Abraham saying, wow, now I know you really care. Now, as far as the offering, it may sound a bit bizarre to us, but there is the idea every day. I'm thinking about what the code of Jewish law says, and it takes from the Talmud. Every day when we say the Shema, and we cover our eyes and we say, God is one. God is one is not meant to be an analysis or a statement of theology in just in a simple sense, I'm looking for the right word for it, but in a sanitized sense. It's supposed to be a statement of love, saying, you are the oneness of life. There's nothing in life without you. Everything I value, you're at the core of it. And therefore, I am committed to you. And that's where we go straight, the Torah goes straight into the verse saying that we should love God, because the Shema is a statement of love. And then it says we should love God with all our hearts, with our souls, and with our, it's hard to translate that word, but it's with our every. Ma'od in Hebrew means very, and with your very. In other words, beyond. Now, one of the things that it says in Jewish law, even though it's codified as part of Jewish law, is to imagine then that we would be giving ourselves up if someone, because unfortunately we've had too many times through our history where we've had to choose between our very lives and our religion, to imagine that, which is, it's a little, you can think it's a little bit macabre to imagine that every day that we're facing that. But in Jewish law, it doesn't mean, I don't think it means it in that way at all. It's just to say, it's whatever the challenges I have in life that kind of distract me from you, you're more important. I'm going to find my way through those without losing sight of you. That's what we're saying to God. And even with the offerings also, and it's from the Talmud, Nachmanides says it very clearly that it's in the giving of the offering, is we're saying it's like we're giving ourselves. We don't believe in human sacrifice. We're not giving ourselves, but we're giving ourselves over. And therefore, this idea of the commitment, the imagery of us giving ourselves over like a burning offering, I don't know how that's going to float anyone's boat. It doesn't particularly do it for me. But the idea of saying that I've got a lot of things that I value in life and a lot of things pulling at me and things that I would work for and that I care for and that I'm checking on. But ultimately, God, you are the source of everything. And and I'm not distracted, my list of priorities. I know that you're the whole list. It's everything traces back to you. And saying, so therefore I am yours, and whatever I have to deal with, I'm going to make it work. That's where the Shema, that's where the offerings want to take us. That's where the Shema wants to take us. So here it says, the submission of the total human being is expressed in the donation of the wood for the altar, on top of which every offering was placed. So since we're talking about submission, it says, look at the thing with the wood. It's a little funny. You bring an offering, it's cakes, it's animals, whatever it is, but wood is part of everything, of every It's not even the offering itself. You think it's just a support for the offering. Through that, the fire, you need the fire, you need the wood, but that's not the offering. But the wood actually has a very, very important place. And in the donations of the wood, the Talmud says that sometimes the joy of those donating the wood was greater than those bringing the offering. Why? In donating the wood, the donor knew that his donation or her donation would be subordinate to the chief entity, the animal being sacrificed. Furthermore, his wood would not necessarily be used to burn his own offering. It would most likely be used to burn someone else's. The absence of the self in this offering parallels the selflessness manifest in our general submission to God. If I was I'm very committed to Morristown Hospital, and I really appreciate them, and I'm a billionaire, and I want to give them money. Why do I want to give them money? I want to give them money because I want to advance their goals and their service to the community. Likely is what I'm doing. I'll give a wing that's more, it'll be a department that's more close to my heart. And that's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Imagine that I say, I'm going to give, you need $1 million for a wing, but I'm going to give it to pay for all the paper needed, all the pens, all the chairs, all the toilet paper. That's not as meaningful. But the hospital needs it. It would show, I don't know, I've never heard of anyone doing that, but it would show my commitment to the hospital as the hospital. And that it really has nothing to do with me. And therefore, I just want to make sure the hospital works. So I want to pay for, for their security guards, whatever. There's no big, there's no big celebration. I can't even look at something with great pride because I'm not sure that's the security guard or the piece of paper or the pen that I paid for. But I gave to the hospital, and the hospital can have function. The bringing of the wood was not a glitzy thing, and it could be used someone else's offering. That was a big deal. Wow, I brought an offering, and this is my connection to God. But bringing the wood showed a selflessness in the commitment to the persons and the person's general care for the general communal commitment to God. But it's even more. The greatest self-effacement, however, was demonstrated by those who chopped down the trees for the wood. Unlike those who donated the wood and sought immediately attain the holy status that made it fit for the altar, the wood choppers did their work long before the wood was consecrated. They did not see the logs they cut become holy and part of the temple service, even though this was their intention. Their task, therefore, afforded the least possibility of getting caught up in the exhilaration of achievement, and thereby forgetting the true greatness and worth are achieved through serving God with complete selflessness and transparency. The part of the communal approach to the temple was that people would go out this time of year in the summer, and some families had the job, the honor, they would chop down trees. They would get wood for the temple, and they would check it to make sure it was fit for it, and you want to make sure it was dry and it wasn't wormy, whatever. It wasn't even them coming to the temple with the stuff. They were chopping down, and then it was brought to the temple. All they were doing was servicing the service. They were supporting other people's service. And yet they were critical, because without that, you couldn't do without the wood, there's no fire. So the goal then is to be a wood chopper, because the Talmud does speak very, very highly of these wood choppers. And the idea there's a point that to be a wood chopper means to remain focused on serving God with consummate selflessness. We should want good things to happen. When good things happen, and when we make good things happen, there can be some personal gain also. If someone does something nice for us, it's my mitzvah to thank them publicly if they'll allow it. So there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, for what a person would want, we should really commit ourselves. So we want good things to happen, and we want to help. People know about it. They don't have to know about it. I will tell you, but if the people know about it, you'll inspire them to do it. Then maybe I'll convince you to let me publicize it, because these are competing values. But intrinsically, what we should want is to be a cog in the wheel of good things happening. And if the chopping down the tree it ends up in the temple, and because we're doing it for the temple, and people can have their religious experience, and we as a community can come closer to God, we should be happy. Does anyone know exactly that I chopped down the tree? Is that necessary? And that's really where this is coming from. So with that, let's start the questions. So I wish you all a wonderful week, a healthy one, happy one.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
So when you say love, the component has to be trust.
Love of God, you mean?
Yes.
Yes. Trust and safety are the core of any real love.
Trust, because it's so hard to describe what is love. Like,
Right.
it's not this oh my gosh,
It's not right. And I often try not to use the word love, because we think about that more as romantic, but it's a sense of connection. It's a sense of firm connection, and that's it doesn't have to be necessarily passionate, but it has to be strong. That I know we're connected, and even maybe something happens in my life and say, well, God, what's going on? But I don't doubt that God is with me. I'm working with it, and believing that God's part of my life, is I want that connection to be present and felt, not just when I'm praying, but when I'm living.
Thank you so much. That's perfect.
Have a great week.
Thank you, Rabbi. You too.
Thank you.